Hello friends, this video on friction part 3 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. Before that, let us talk about the factors affecting friction. So what are the different factors which give rise to friction or on which frictional force is dependent? Now primarily there are two important factors which affect friction. One is smoothness of the surface. So basically how smooth or how rough the surface is, that decides how much the friction will be. Because as I said, if you are considering a perfectly smooth surface, a surface which is extremely smooth, so there is no roughness involved, so that surface will not have any friction. So if at all you are talking about a perfectly smooth surface, so for a perfectly smooth surface, the frictional force, that is force of friction, will be equal to 0. However, this is also true that a perfectly smooth surface doesn't exist in reality. So it is just a hypothetical or a theoretical statement. But in reality, there is no surface which is perfectly smooth. Even the most smooth looking surface also has irregularities on its surface. So there is nothing called perfectly smooth surface which exists in reality. So the first factor is how smooth or how rough the surface is. So based on that, the friction will change. So if a surface is smooth, the friction will be less. If a surface is rough, the force of friction will be more. Secondly, how tightly the surfaces are held together. Now, as I mentioned, that friction comes into picture only when two surfaces are in contact with each other. Now, when I say in contact, there are chances that the two surfaces, they are just touching each other. There is a probability where the two surfaces are like, in a good way, they are touching each other. Like, let us take an example. So, let us suppose this is one surface and this is another surface. Okay, so maybe this is a table and this one is a table and this is some object. So let us consider the same table, and on the same table you have an object like this. So this is another object. Now again on the same table you have, let us say, a bigger and a heavier object like this. So this is a bigger and heavier object. This is a comparatively smaller object, and this is also a smaller object with a different shape. Now in all these three cases, just try to look at the surface of contact. So where are they in touch with each other? So here if you see, the two surfaces are in contact with each other, but they are not held very tightly. So they are just touching each other at a point. But since they are in contact, so the friction will come into picture. If you consider this case, so here if you see, compared to first scenario, in second scenario, the surfaces are more tightly held to each other because they are more in contact with each other. Now you consider the third scenario. So here you see, since the box is heavier and bigger, so it is like when the box becomes heavier, or let us say if you are pushing this box from above, so you are applying some force from above. So that means basically you are trying to press this box hard against this surface. So these two surfaces are very tightly held together, right? Now, the more tightly the surfaces are held together, the more would be the force of friction. So in these three scenarios, 1, 2 and 3, the force of friction would be maximum in 3 and the force of friction would be minimum in 1. So it is not only the roughness and smoothness of the surface which decides how much the frictional force would be, it is also a factor that how tightly the surfaces are held together. So that also is a very important factor to decide how much friction it would exist. So let us discuss the first factor in little more detail, that how the smoothness or roughness of a surface affect friction. Now you will see that friction is lesser on a smooth surface than a rough one. So it is always less on a smooth surface. So if you don't believe me, let us look at some examples. Just try to stretch your legs when you are doing your exercise or yoga session, or maybe your aerobics class. And you will find that on a rough floor, it is little difficult for you to stretch. But if the floor is smooth enough, maybe you can smoothen the floor by applying some oil or water or powder on the floor, and then the floor turns slippery, and then you try to do the same stretching and you will feel that it becomes easier to stretch now. That's because your legs tend to slip over the floor because the floor has turned slippery, therefore the floor offers less friction. So the opposition is less to your motion and therefore you are able to move your legs more easily. So stretching your legs becomes easy on a smoother surface when compared to a rough surface. So that is one example which tells you that smoother surface offers less friction. Let us look at another example. Just try driving your car on a smooth road versus a rough road. So a smooth road with lesser bumps and a rough road with a lot of bumps, lot of uneven stones and rocks here and there. So these two types of roads, what do you see? That more force is needed to be applied to make the car move on a rough surface, because here you have a lot of bumps, ups and downs, so you need to apply more force to drive your car because your car finds it difficult to move on a rough road. That's because the friction is more here. So when the friction is more, so that means the opposition to motion is more, because friction always opposes motion. So the movement of the car becomes difficult. But still, if you want to make your car move on the rough surface, you need to apply more force. Now, on the contrary, when you consider the smooth surface, so here you see that your car moves absolutely perfect and it moves at a higher speed as well. So you just do not need to apply a lot of force to make your car move. That's because here the friction is less. Therefore, the applied force which is required is also less, because opposition is less, so the movement just happens on its own. So you do not really need to apply some extra force to make your car move. So these examples show that if the surface is smooth, friction is less. If the surface is rough, friction is more. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more educational videos with a better experience. Please do not forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for latest updates. Thank you once again.